All right. Okay, I think we will start now as we have a good number of people joined us. So first of all, thank you very much to Tatavik and Malene from the Resolve Academy for organizing this with us. It's really fantastic to be working together, so I appreciate it. And thank you very much to our speakers today. It's going to be, I think, a very interesting conversation. We come from many different backgrounds, so I think there's a lot of very interesting views that you will be hearing over today. So just to give you a little bit of background on our speakers. So our first speaker is Jack Levin. So Jack was a litigator, and he appeared in courts and arbitral forums throughout the United States. He began his career as a federal clerkship, and then he went to Davis Polk and Wardle, and he was a founding partner of the New York City firm of Howard, Darby and Levin, and a successor firm, Howard Smith and Levin, which then merged with Covington and Burlington. So he began to acquire training in arbitration and mediation and other litigation throughout the years, and clients increasingly sought conflict resolutions. So with and in 2011, he retired from Covington to become a full-time domestic and international arbitrator and mediator and creator of conflict solutions. Our next speaker, Donna Ross. Now, Donna is an international ADR practitioner. She specializes in corporate and commercial disputes, both domestically and internationally. And she has exceptional expertise in appropriate dispute resolution, or ADR. So she's the principal of Donna Ross Dispute Resolution. And this is her new venture, or not so new now, I think, Donna, in Singapore. She is qualified in civil and common law. She has a very varied background, actually, having lived on quite a number of different continents. And she's acted as an arbitrator, mediator, negotiator, and an advocate in high value and complex disputes relating to cross-border deals, private equity, technology, telecommunications, construction, partnership, shareholder import licensing, distribution agreements, retail leasing, and the wine industry, which would be an interesting one, I suspect. Now our next speaker is Christine Maksoud. She's a Lebanese qualified lawyer, and a solicitor of England and Wales. So she's been practicing in the UAE since 2016. She's a senior lawyer at Al Tamimi and Company, and she's an IMI accredited mediator and a mediation trainer. And on top of this, she's the founding member and serves as the executive director of the Mediation MENA Hub, which is a fantastic mediation hub. Everyone should look into it. So she has experience in resolving disputes through alternative mediation methods, such as mediation, negotiation, and enabling amicable settlements. She can also advise on UAE law, strategic counsel, pre-litigation guidance, and managing intricate and sensitive commercial and civil disputes. And our fourth speaker, I can't count, is Guy Ivazian. I hope I said that right, and I'm sorry if I didn't. So he currently works as a fractional legal counsel for startups and scale-ups in the Netherlands and across borders. And he also has a very, very fascinating background, actually. He helps international founders make fast, smart legal decisions so they can grow their businesses. So he's obviously a very good guy to be going to see. He's a business lawyer and a mediator. and he's spent decades supporting founders, investors, and family offices across European countries and other regions. From tech startups and gold mining ventures to real estate funds and private relocation cases. So he's very much an advocate of mediation and how it can create amicable solutions. So everyone here is very much, as you can see, very pro mediation and likes to, well, I like to hope, likes it to be the first port of call. So I think now what I'd like to do is to ask each speaker if they could please briefly share their experience of commercial mediation and how it's shaped your perspective on best practices. So I think if we go in the order that I have just listed you, so I will ask Jack this question first. If you can give us a brief description of your experience. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. I think there are things about mediation which are universally true. And one is, and these are things that are often forgotten and need to be kept firmly in mind, especially by mediators themselves. One is that it's a consensual process, and that people are free to change it and fashion it and adjust it as they go to suit their needs. The other is that mediation, unlike other processes that we're involved in the law, needs to maintain its momentum. It doesn't have momentum unto itself. And one of the hardest things for a mediator to do is to keep the parties interested and committed. And everybody needs that momentum, including sometimes the mediator, him or herself. Another essential, which people kind of overlook, is that you have to gain and maintain trust. Being retained as a mediator is only the very, very beginning. Sometimes that's done through counsel. You haven't met the client. The client doesn't know who you are and may not meet you until the mediation session, which I would like to avoid. So you have to keep the trust very firmly in focus, or you really can't accomplish anything. And I'd also say that being a mediator involves maintaining a sense of possibility while being realistic, which sometimes means pausing or even terminating a mediation, because the worst thing you can do in a mediation is to have people feel that they're worse off or less trustful than they were when they started. So these are universal things about mediation that I think are still the foundational things, without which they cannot be successful, because mediations are not self-executing. Those are the basics. I mean, I'm sure any of us could talk forever, and we may try, so I'll stop there and answer questions if anyone has them. But thank you for letting me start this off.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Donna, would you like to share your experience?
Well, yes, I'd be happy to. And first of all, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Mediation Chambers and Resolve Academy, and also all the participants who have logged on a Saturday instead of doing what a lot of us do on Saturdays, which is not always listening to webinars. So I hope that some of this will be helpful or interesting. And again, happy to field questions. I'm going to talk about some of the strategies a bit later, but let me just give a bit of a background about how I became a mediator. And it really was during my practice as a lawyer, where I was litigating and doing transactional work, and very often found myself playing mediator. I also did a lot of settlement conferences for clients, because even though I was representing them in litigation, and especially pre-litigation, I always found that finding a settlement, whether through mediation or negotiation at that time, was almost always better business-wise for my clients. So I started acting as a kind of an ad hoc mediator, dealing with other parties, which is what led me to finally become accredited. I'm also an arbitrator, and as Jack said, sometimes it's just no, you have to walk away, and that's as true from a dispute as a deal. And very often, when parties don't walk away from deals and they agree to things they can't perform, that's where we see that disputes arise afterwards, especially when you have a power imbalance and a company really wants to get the deal with that big multinational and they accept terms they can't. And there's something called deal mediation, which I'm very interested in, but is not very popular because very often lawyers think that they don't need any help in negotiations. Whereas someone structuring, because a mediator's role is really to help structure the process and help the parties, and sometimes even a negotiation that could help. So that's what led me to finally become accredited, first in the US and then in other countries. And I believe, again, as Jack mentioned, and I think Teresa Chang, the former Secretary of Justice of Hong Kong, has a program called Mediate First, which companies sign on to. So early mediation, I believe, is almost always preferable. There are times when, in large disputes where parties need more time before they can have that mediation window. But before costs get too high and before parties get too entrenched in their positions in the fight, mediation is always a good option to at least try to resolve some or all of the dispute. And that's why I do arbitration too, but mainly mediation.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. I hear about what you're saying about especially parties becoming entrenched in their disputes. That's I think quite key. So Christine, if you have anything to share with us here.
Sure. First, hello everyone and good afternoon. And thank you so much for having me on this panel. For me, I think it's going to be a little bit different because I practice in a market where mediation is not very mature. So a lot of factors maybe need to be considered when developing a mediation practice for mediators and even for lawyers who are also experiencing mediation processes for the first time, acting as mediation representatives, our mediation advocates. A little bit of background about the culture here in the Middle East. It is an adversarial somehow culture. People believe in litigation. Historically, litigation has been the go-to or the default mechanism for most disputes. In the last maybe decade, arbitration started gaining traction for sure. And this today is the go-to in all maybe high value disputes, such as construction disputes, which are the majority of the disputes here in the region, and also cross-border disputes. When it comes to mediation, when I moved to Dubai almost 9 years ago, there was no mediation maybe at all. And we started only in the last few years seeing this surge in policy making and creating frameworks for mediation. We saw a lot of countries, not only the UAE, but also other Gulf countries developing their own frameworks, becoming signatory to the Singapore Convention for facilitate enforcement of cross-border mediated settlements. We've also seen a lot of regulatory bodies and ministries having their own mediation processes. And yesterday, and I think whoever is attending here from the Middle East, we know that yesterday was a big milestone for Dubai in particular in mediation. There has been an adoption of the Dubai International Mediation Center, which is interestingly is a collaboration between the Legal Affairs Department, which is the equivalent body to the Bar Association, and a leading European mediation provider, which is the ADR Center. And that's very important for, even for the legal community and the legal profession itself, because one of maybe the barriers for the promotion of mediations in the last years was maybe lawyers, because either they're not familiar with the process, either they have concerns about how the process is going to impact their business and their practice. And simply, they don't even, most lawyers not even know that we had a law in 2021, let's say. So the Legal Affairs Department did also a huge step recently to educate lawyers, doing mediation advocacy mandatory courses. And now they have initiated this, big initiative to develop the center. So I think mediation is going to see a new era, let's say, here in the Middle East. We're very, we're anticipating, and we have a lot of high expectations about what's going to happen. So when it comes to actual mediations, okay, so I mentioned the default recourse to litigation, but at the same time, when we talk about culture, in certain circumstances, the settlement is also rooted in the Arab culture, but this only happens in very limited circumstances. So the elderly, for example, in the family, in the community, they do intervene in most cases. These situations, they're most likely called like conciliation rather than mediation, and also they're very hard to track. But we know they've always been, around. Now, in the last few years, we started seeing a court-annexed mediation, or let's call it conciliation, because it's being delivered by the court employees as opposed to private mediators. But we have now, of course, a framework for contractual mediation. When it comes to my experience, I've seen and I worked during my time in Al Tamimi, which is a leading law firm here in the region, on a lot of shareholders disputes and also family business disputes. And I think this is the majority of the disputes here in the region that could use conciliation and mediation. And what is very particular about this kind of disputes is basically the relationship and the emotions. A lot of high emotions. Most shareholders disputes are like divorce in business. So there's a lot of emotions that needs to be handled, and also in family businesses, because all the personal issues usually resurfaces when it comes to disputes. So there is a lot of uniqueness and intricacies about dealing with this kind of dispute. And I think any mediator that needs to practice in the region needs not only to understand the culture and be culturally aware, but also have the capability to do a lot of capacity building on both parties, because people do not know what mediation is, even when it comes to lawyers, not only the parties. So I would say capacity building is something, maybe a role not very common for mediators practicing in mature jurisdiction and markets, but here in the region, I think a lot of capacity building on both parties is required, in addition to obviously the cultural awareness.
Thank you. I'm sure that it's going to be absolutely fascinating in that region for the next few years at the very least, to watch it growing and evolving. Very exciting. And certainly cultural issues, I think that we have that in every different jurisdiction, don't we?
Yeah.
But I think, it'll be very, very interesting to watch and learn more about in the future. So thank you. Now I'm going to call on Guy, but I just want to tell participants that if you have any questions, by the way, we're very happy to answer them. Please put them in the chat. If it's appropriate, they will be asked at the time. Otherwise, we will address them at the end. But if you do have questions as the people are speaking or everyone is speaking, then please do put them in the chat for us to answer. Thank you. Okay, so Guy, please, we would love to hear from your jurisdiction and your perspective. Thank you.
Well, good morning or good afternoon. Thanks for everyone joining this webinar, and thanks to Resolve Academy for organizing this. Very glad to be here and among this bright people in a panel, and hopefully this will be a very fruitful discussion. Well, as Alex mentioned, I'm based in the Netherlands currently, and mediation, just like in the case of, let's say, Dubai, wasn't something very known until recently. But this concerns commercial mediation. Funnily enough, mediation as a concept in the Netherlands was used quite widely within workspace, within, let's say, employee and employer disputes, and within communities. So actually finding consensus, finding the so-called middle ground is something that is deeply rooted in the Dutch culture. So whenever there is a dispute within a community, it is quite common to rely on so-called local mediator, neighborhood mediator actually, who is going around and trying to, who is appointed by the city hall and is going around and trying to solve your problems with your neighbors, community, and so on. Now, when it comes down to commercial mediation, until recently, and by recently I really mean maybe around 5 to 8 years, it was something exclusive only to lawyers of big law firms. And this category of people actually treated mediation as something like, well, preparation for actual court case. So it wasn't very widely used. But recently, mediation is actually getting big traction here in the Netherlands as well. And we are moving to a situation where the government committed in the upcoming years to launch a central registry of mediators. And this will be a public registry for people to know, because funnily enough, I think most of us in this webinar would have a similar experience. Whenever we would talk about mediation, people first hear meditation. So especially when you're dealing with some startup owners or founders of businesses that are based in different jurisdictions where mediation is not very known, and you offer them, hey, I think we need to go with the mediation first. And once I even heard, well, I tried yoga, it didn't work. The perception of commercial mediation is changing. And I think just like in other jurisdictions, this is going to be very hot topic in upcoming years, not only because what mediation offers, but also how mediation can be conducted. Because now we're talking a lot about hybrid mediation, online mediation. So these methods actually open door for resolving a lot of cross-border issues on early stage. So yeah, I think we were in the right place and right time to talk about this beautiful thing as commercial mediation.
Thank you. Yeah, certainly. I've had the same experience as well about saying, "Oh, I'm doing a mediation," and I was told, "Oh, that's very nice." I thought, I'm pretty sure you're thinking meditation at this point. So yes, it's interesting though. I had always imagined the Netherlands would be more advanced than that actually, but probably because of the culture, I had imagined that. Fascinating. Thank you. So, okay, I think we'll now, I now have a few different questions for our speakers. So our first, my first question would be addressed to Donna. So can you tell me, what strategies, what's top 3 strategies would you suggest? What do you think are essential for successfully resolving business disputes through mediation? Could you give us some tips?
I will. It's really hard to boil it down to 3 because I always say I have a toolbox, but I'm sure there are many others, and my colleagues will touch upon them. But I just before I do that, and maybe this would be a strategy, I've also heard not just meditation but medication for difficult parties. I mean, not that I would, but that is not one of the 3 strategies that I'm going to touch upon, though. So I think if I had to choose 3, just, off the cuff, the first one would be, and I think that, hearing that, maybe commercial mediation isn't as widespread in some countries as others, and the capacity building, as Christine said, is important. I think that what I'm saying would probably apply to any type of mediation, but so flexibility and creativity, I think that that's really important. As Jack said, we don't always meet the parties beforehand. We try to. Sometimes if you're doing court-ordered or annexed mediation, you don't meet even the lawyers beforehand. And even when you do, or if you're doing a big dispute and you have a mediation plan and you've met with them and you've set everything out, we say that mediation is an art, not a science, and there are always moving parts. No matter, what you do beforehand to prepare, many times there were surprises. So I think you really have to be able to think on your feet. And I'm just going to give two really quick examples before I move on to the other two, because I want to leave time for others. I just last week, or this past week, I had a mediation where they were supposed to have a Mandarin interpreter and they forgot the interpreter. The lawyers, both parties were Chinese speaking. One spoke a bit better English. And in order to not waste too much time while they were trying to locate an interpreter, the lawyers spoke both languages. I thought, what do I do? And for my opening, explaining the process, because they weren't familiar with it, I used Google Translate and I shared the screen. I've never done that before. It was semi-accurate. I mean, it was about 80% accurate, so it was enough to keep it going and not, stop the mediation or have me speaking where, one party or one and a half parties didn't understand anything. So, when you're kind of there and something happens, I was just in a hearing, a case management conference where all the technology wasn't working. So you try to figure out. So that flexibility, getting people to log on with their phone, do this, I think that's important. I do a lot of online mediation. And so that's the creativity and the flexibility. And then sometimes too, you get parties who weren't supposed to be present. They can be support people or lawyers. How do you separate them? How do you deal with that? Those are things we have to deal with very often last minute. And that goes for all types. Persistence. I mean, for me, and I know Jack, said that sometimes you don't want to push parties too much, but you can usually get a sense when parties want to settle or should settle or can settle even, and they always say they want to, but then they do everything not to. So I think it's important to be persistent. And I had a mediation once that was actually a court-ordered mediation, and I was told that the mediator beforehand had said they'd had a private mediation where they were paid more than I was by the court. And the mediator had said, okay, well, we're done. Let me know in a week if you've managed to settle or not. And that was the end of it. I carry on as long as the parties are willing. And sometimes it can be on a Friday night with a glass of wine in my hand at 8 p.m. Or I follow up with the parties afterwards just to see how they're going. And I think that's really helpful, other than cases where clearly, they're going to fight it out and it's not going to work. And then the last one, which I think is really important, is reality testing. Very often commercial parties, and I see this in several countries, they want former judges, or they want people with a gavel almost, or, someone who can tell the other party they're wrong, or who's going to really be more of a judge in a settlement conference than a mediator. And I don't agree with that, because I think parties need to participate and be heard, and it not just being a back and forth. However, I think that tough reality testing at times is really important in commercial disputes. The emotional part is really important. It's great. But at some point, I think business parties appreciate that you're going to really, help them to move their positions by, I call it playing devil's advocate, but I'll just stop at that for now.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, if anyone else has got anything else they would like to add to it, please do speak up. I'm
May
sure that
may
there
I
was some.
just,
Sorry, please, Jack.
Alex,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to ask something, but I think everyone's addressed it. And I think that Christine said two things that were very important. One is capacity building. I believe that every mediation is a world unto itself. It exists separate from everything else. So even if you're in a jurisdiction with parties that you think are very sophisticated, you may need to do capacity building in that mediation with those people. Nothing comes prearranged, preordained, and you only understand what people are thinking and what their capacity is as you go through it. The other is family disputes exist everywhere. But family disputes are not just among families. A corporation is a family. And I've got some family mediation background, divorce mediation background. You have to know the relationships in the family, including, by the way, without joking, who's addicted, right? Where the power structures are, what the history is, what the real conflicts are. I like to say that beneath every dispute, there's a conflict, right? There's a joke that there was a famous American comedian, and he said to his wife, "It's not the pot roast, Mildred, it's the last 40 years," right? So the thing you're fighting over may only be symbolic of the underlying relationship problem. And so being aware of all these things within this particular mediation is incredibly important. Uh, and until you know it, you may never be able to get behind the problem without, being a psychotherapist. Um, so I wanted to emphasize these things because we can talk about differences in countries and cultures, but at the end of the day, mediation is all about listening and understanding what is the problem here. And with respect to pushing people, which I certainly endorse, with trust comes permission, right? So as I'm sure Donna would say, you can't give a reality check to people on the first day, even though you're very confident that you know what the problem is. You have to earn the right to tell them the truth. They don't, they say they want to settle, but what they really want you to do is to make them show up the next time, right? And so these things are completely universal. I hear them coming through in what everyone is saying, and we mediators learn this with experience. And I guess the last thing is we have to have humility, because humility means that you're not really sure of what you need to know. And if the parties need to see that humility in you as well, so they don't think you're just teaching them or dictating. Anyhow, sorry to take too long, but I thought these things were kind of coming over me like a wave in hearing my colleagues.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. That's really, really very interesting, I think, and very on point as well. It's yeah. Um, Thank you. So
Alex, just there is a question, but I don't want to take up too much time. So maybe Mr. Kunal, I'll reply to it a bit after Alex, you call on Christine and Gaktu.
okay. Okay. Thank you. All right. So yeah, so the next question actually that I have is to Hike. What are some common challenges that you have encountered in commercial mediation, and do you have any solutions to overcoming them?
Well, one of there are a couple of very common challenges actually. One of them is the familiarity with the procedure and processes. So whenever we have two business owners on the table trying to resolve a conflict, it happens a lot that they do not know how actual mediation works before the moment that they step into the room. And everybody has this image. Okay, you go to the court, you have general image how it works. You just stand there, judge gives you some time to speak up, etc. But there is no image for people how actually commercial mediation works. So to very good strategy to actually overcome this challenge is to have the prep calls, to have, let's say, 10-15 minutes call before the mediation session to explain them how things work, what kind of rules there are, and what they can expect from this. So then they will come more prepared. And this actually is linked to another point, another challenge. In most of the time, parties consider mediator as a judge. So they have this image, they're going to walk into a room and then mediator will give them an answer. And one of the ways of, again, solving this challenge is explaining them procedure, the role of the mediator. We're not here to give solution for them, but rather facilitate so they both come to a solution. And it also happens that the parties come with their legal counsels, and this is yet another challenge because legal counsel, not all the legal counsels are trained and skilled enough to participate in mediation. So this turns into a litigation session whereby the job of mediator becomes a bit harder. So to battle this, one of the possible solutions is to hold private caucuses with both parties and explain them, set the rules, make sure that the legal counsels understand what are the boundaries that they can engage during the session. And another challenge that I'm seeing quite often is the power imbalances. And I think Donna mentioned that in the beginning of the webinar. this power imbalance is actually happens quite often when we have, let's say, founder of a business speaking with a big private equity, and there is immediately this pressure on this founder, whereby the private equity tend to be always right because they have the funding. So I think mediation is one of the best for us for resolving these conflicts, because unlike court situation, in skill mediator actually can create this environment within mediation session where both parties are not only being they don't only have time to speak, but also time to be heard. And I think this is one of the greatest tools that mediation can offer, because when you create such an intimate environment where both parties can be open and can be transparent in their let's say negotiation, I think this can overcome these power imbalances. And I think, if in a nutshell, those are the core challenges that I've witnessed in the past years.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I think it's correct that there are quite a number of challenges, I suppose, that we can encounter in mediations. So very, very interesting to hear the ones that you've come across so far. So my next question then is for Christine. So Christine, you've touched before on cultural differences in the mediation process. So I'm curious to know about the impact that they have, and what best practices would you suggest to help navigate these? And maybe that's particular to your jurisdiction or general, as you think appropriate.
Sure, thank you. I mean, of course, cultural awareness is something, I mean, needs to be considered anywhere in the world, but maybe it's optional somewhere else. But here in the Middle East, I think it's mandatory. It's fundamental for you to be able to practice as a mediator. I mean, any Western mediator or a foreign mediator who's coming to this market to build a practice needs to be aware and address and embrace so many cultural differences. What's the beauty of living here in the Middle East is that you don't only have local people and Arab people, you have many nationalities, especially like a place like Dubai and many other Gulf countries as well. And you're often you see yourself in a room, in a mediation room or in a conciliation room where you have local people and foreigners, and this in itself is at the beginning of a process where you have to consider every step, starting from, okay, let's talk about a mediator who wants to prepare for a mediation. I mean, the first thing you need to do your homework. Just look people up, see who are the parties, what's their background, where they're from, how they like to be addressed as well. If they have any, for example, a role in the community, if they have like from the royal family or from a certain like there are things you need to ask about. Also, religious consideration, like if you're scheduling meetings, avoid prayers time. If you're serving food, ask about restrictions. I mean, you don't have to, open champagne when you have a settlement agreement. You have to ask before. So a lot of things I think people should not take for granted when they move to this region or they want to practice in this region. Also, there is this culture of face saving. So we don't like a reputation of conflict, even if we did something wrong. We don't like people to know about it. And we don't like a direct interaction. Maybe I'm generalizing here. There are always exceptions, but I'm talking about in general, the culture. We like subtle intervention, subtle approach. Don't say things directly to us, especially in front of, someone else. Also, language could be very important. Like I would see co-mediation between maybe a foreign mediator, Western, with a local mediator could be very effective. Someone who not only speaks Arabic, but also the local dialect for each country, because each country has its own dialect. Sometimes maybe we need an authority figure. Sometimes we respect when there is someone more senior with age, with experience, rather than someone who's, I'm not talking about capabilities, it's just about the perception. And this may be a barrier for people to engage and fully engaged in a process. So yeah, I mean, I think doing your homework properly, consult with local people is very important in order to avoid anything culturally related to really to prevent parties really from getting the best outcome out of a mediation.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting that it sounds like the mediation is quite appropriate for over there, as you're saying that people don't like direct, excuse my voice, sorry, direct intervention, or I can't remember the
Yeah.
word you used, but so do you think then the mediation actually works quite well because of that in your region?
Yeah, I think the only reason it's still underutilized or underused because not many people know about it. I know the benefits of it, but I have a belief that once we manage to raise awareness and let people know about it from the business and the legal community, I really think the need for it is going to increase with time because people care about relationships a lot in this part
Yeah.
of the world. And this is
Yeah.
maybe the only way you can actually save the relationship and save face, let's say.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Yes, you really need to get the lawyers on board, definitely, to to understand it so that they can promote it and
Absolutely.
keep it going. Thank you. So I think I'll turn back to Donna now. So question for you then would be then, you know, we've had a lot of tips and techniques and ideas already. Oh, someone is not muted. Could you please mute yourself?
So I'd like you to confirm or
Hello, someone, one of our participants.
Alex, you should be able to mute people. You're the host.
I know, I can't find them though. Oh, there we go. Got them. Thank you. Okay, right. Yeah, sorry, there's quite a number of people trying to find them was hard.
Yeah.
Okay, so Donna, if you could please tell us what techniques can the mediator use to use during a mediation to build trust between the parties, and to help them to ensure a long-term relationship post dispute? Do you have some ideas, suggestions for that?
Yeah, well, I think it depends to a large extent on the dispute. There's some disputes that by the time they come to mediation, it's just about helping the parties maybe move on if there's no longer a relationship. But if there's a possibility of a relationship, I think this harks back to what all of the panelists have said. One is that capacity building, and that's as important for parties as often lawyers. And you know, if we just like stop for a moment and discuss the role of lawyers, lawyers can be a mediator's best ally. Sometimes I have to work with the lawyers because the parties are the ones being difficult when it's, you know, whether it's to continue the relationship or not. Sometimes the lawyers get in the way. And I've had, and this will bring me afterwards to the question about using virtual platforms, where I've been able to separate lawyers from the parties when, you know, they walk in and no matter what you've done before, they, you know, throw papers on the table or start with their statement of defense. You know, I've got lawyers who have been so arrogant, and I've had to speak with the parties separately who wanted to settle. And these are lawyers who've told me, well, I've had mediation training. Now, I'm giving like the horror stories here, but I think that it's really important to try to see through as to what the parties actually want, and is there a possibility to continue? And that comes back, I think, to two things that I mentioned and others did, which is early mediation before it's almost too late, because it's not just that they're, you know, entrenched in their positions, but things might have happened if you're talking about shareholders or a joint venture or, you know, a dispute on a contract, if they've gone to new suppliers or parties, or, you know, sometimes it's hard to bring things back. But so an earlier mediation helps that. And also creativity, because parties don't always see anything other than the binary solution. And lawyers often don't either, because they're there, you know, they didn't pay, you know, we want our money, you know, we win, they lose, without looking at, well, what can we do to go beyond that. If the other party doesn't have the money to pay, but you have a 10-year contract, is there a way of, let's say, reducing the payments and then, having future supply contracts have a higher percentage? I'm just throwing things off the top of my head here, but there's so many different ways of doing that. I had one where, well, the parties really they were close friends and then in a fight, but there was a possibility of setting up, two different divisions where one would be doing merchandising, the other would be doing the creative work. And so even though the personal relationship couldn't be mended at that point, there was an opportunity for them to continue working together. So I think that's really important. And I think also as the mediator, we talk often about business divorce. And I think that, what Jack has said, if we look at culture, it's not just, families, it's, a company's a family, granted, but you have different levels of hierarchy. In Asia, it's very similar to what Christine was saying about the Middle East. In France, it's very similar. If you want to help parties, you have to explain to them sometimes. I did lots of negotiations where the French would put on this beautiful lunch, very similar to China. You have to have dinner, talk about everything but the dispute in order to build that rapport and trust. And the mediator helps build that trust also between the parties before they can go on to even talk about what the dispute is. And by helping them to do that, I think we can help them to keep that relationship. And last thing, which is also about that catharsis of being heard. Someone once said all disputes are about money and ego. I say they're about money and ego, money and emotion, money and pride, money and principle. So if you let the lawyers sometimes or the parties only talk about the money, then you can't help resolve those other issues. And it's only until that's done that people representing their companies, because companies are people, can move forward to resolve a dispute and repair a relationship.
Very interesting. So it sounds like from what both you and Christine have been saying, actually, that lawyers are quite key here. The education of the lawyers and sort of I'm not sure I would say training, but possibly training of them, to understand mediation and what should be, what people should be looking for and what they should be expecting.
And even in places where, mediation is well developed, like Australia, like Jack will speak also to New York, where I was once, Singapore to a certain extent, there's still that, mediation advocacy and needs to be more in the forefront of our training in mediation for lawyers.
Yeah, it does seem to be evolving, doesn't it? I think mediation advocacy, but it's slower, I think, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
and
interesting.
Kunal, just really quickly, I'm sorry, I don't want to hog the floor, but just in response to your question, I do a lot of mediation online. I've done some hybrid also. I think that you can't always know in advance whether it'll be better in person or online, but the success rates and the parties' satisfaction with mediation is about the same. The only problem I would say is during COVID, everyone was on separate screens, and that was great. When you have parties going to chambers or solicitors' offices, lawyers' offices, and they're all together, then it's harder to move the parties around and speak to them separately. But other than that, I think that it's almost like same.
Thank you for that.
And Alex, if I may just give a very brief example on Donna's point about the hierarchy. A couple of years ago, I had a very peculiar case where from one of the parties who had to attend the mediation was a CEO of a big corporation. And when I call with him, we sort of discuss with him the procedure that he has to come, etc., etc. And on the day of the session, his PA showed up at the office, and we were waiting for the CEO. And she said, "Well, my CEO told me that I can attend the first session, and then I'll brief him later, and then we'll see how the second session goes." I said, "Well, it's not how it goes." So, well, he doesn't have time for this kind of things. This is how our hierarchy works. We do the basic job for him, and then he comes on the last session of negotiations. So, well, this is not exactly how mediation works. It's not just a plain negotiation. So, this notion of hierarchy is actually quite interesting. Even within this kind of business mediation, you still quite see it. But I think it's also culturally based thing, honestly.
Wow. Wow, that must have been interesting.
So
So
it's quite peculiar.
yes, yes. So you said the CEO, right? Was it him? Did he come back actually and attend the full mediation in the end, or how
Yeah,
did
yeah. In the
he
end, we
did?
just adjourned. We took a break, I think, around 2, 3 weeks time, and then he came.
And then okay.
It turned out that he couldn't attend that meeting at all, but he said, "Well, I'm not going to stop it." He just sent his PA to take notes, and then he would join for the second session, and it
Wow.
was quite peculiar.
Interesting. Yes, yeah.
I think
That's
this
very
is something we
specific.
might see in a region like ours, and not having the decision makers available in the room. So if there is
Mm.
any work on the relationship, for example, or addressing any emotions underlying that has created the dispute, for example, you will not be able to do it because mostly they will send, someone to represent them and not the actual the decision makers will not be in a mediation role. That's very rare. Yeah.
No, yes. Huh. Interesting, isn't it? Gosh. Different jurisdictions, different ways of handling things, I suppose. So I think there's a lot of questions that I could go with that, but I'm going to take a left turn. And I'd like to actually ask Jack now. So how important do you feel that follow-up is after a mediation? And do you have any practices that you can recommend to for parties to help to maintain relationships, or for any agreement perhaps that's agreed to really proceed on track?
Well, just as the mediation doesn't happen at the mediation session, the mediation starts when you're retained, right?
Mm.
The mediation doesn't end, or your services are not really over until the agreement is signed. And even then, they might be needed. So it's certainly considered to be very basic in the US, for example, that when parties at the end of a long day come to an agreement, right, and they want to walk away, you say, no, 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 let's have a term sheet. I don't care if you write it on the back of a napkin. So that you get them to do that, but of course, and there are fights about whether that's a binding agreement. You get them to do that, and then you monitor and sometimes cajole and push them to get the settlement agreement. And often you'll find that the real problems or new problems occur during that period because they may have an agreement in principle, but then the lawyers try to win the settlement contract, right? So you have to be on top of it. People who are inclined to fight will never stop fighting. There's always something. And I recently had a gigantic arbitration about whether it was a binding agreement in the mediation phase. So you have to stay with it. And if you don't stay with it, you really shouldn't be a mediator. The other thing is that, and this is happening to me with increasing frequency, sometimes the parties, when they draft their agreement, which often has a going forward relationship in it, that's why it's a bigger agreement, they anticipate that they're going to have future problems. And so it's not uncommon for me to be named as kind of an arbitrator or a mediator/arbitrator in the settlement agreement. Although I have to say, I've never had one of those where they came to me later. It's as if naming me, having a mechanism, actually solves the problem because they know they're going to have to come to me and they don't want to come to me because they kind of know how I'll decide, right? But that's a discipline for them. The other thing I want to say, it fits into all this, is that a mediator should never become indispensable to the process, either the mediation itself or the settlement. And so I always encourage counsel and even the parties, if it's appropriate, to talk to each other during the mediation process. So if something comes up where the lawyers could work something out, I say, why don't you call each other? I said, there's no law against that. And sometimes they actually think that because they're in mediation, they can't talk to each other. There's no such rule, right? And sometimes, as we all know, counsels say that they want to get the parties in a room over a cup of coffee or a meal because they're the ones who had the relationship that broke down. Sometimes they're the ones who can actually get the mediation to a conclusion, in part because they're so frustrated with the mediator and the lawyers. They say, enough of this fighting, right? So it's very important for the mediator to know when he or she should not be indispensable. And I want to add too that, mediation is not something that always has that label. And I think Christine referenced this earlier. Mediation is as old as relationships, as families, as tribes. She talked about the elder, the conciliation. And so we have to be attentive in all relationships to when there's a mediation opportunity. So for example, as an arbitrator, I always look for moments during the arbitration. If there's a dispute over documents or something, I say to the lawyers, work it out and get back to me. And to get people into the habit of talking to each other and working it out and not relying on a decision maker can be very helpful, even though they don't know what you're doing. You're keeping a door open at all times. The last thing I want to say, and this also applies to the post-mediation settlement, is that sometimes the conflict in a mediation is on one side. There are conflicts everywhere. I think of it as, when you have first responder training, they say when you reach the scene of an accident and you see people on the ground, before you start treating those people, look around. There may be people more badly injured off the side of the road. And that can be true in a mediation as well, where the problem is actually between the father, the founding father of the business, and the children, or there's a problem between the children and the lawyers, right? You can never assume that people on one side are united at any moment. You may not be able to do anything about it, and you may never want to identify it explicitly, but all these things need to be considered as you work towards a final and enduring settlement. And I should also say, if you see the parties working out a settlement agreement that has really bad terms, as was referenced much earlier, unworkable terms, as the original deal might have had, you may want to call that to their attention because it's not good to be an observer of a catastrophe in the making. And as the mediator, I think you have permission to comment.
Very, very interesting. Thank you for that. Yes, I think that it's very, very important to stay on in touch with parties afterwards and not assume that just because they've said, yes, we agree, that's it. It's very interesting. So I think, mediation has evolved an awful lot. So we're very, very nearly out of time, but I just very quickly want to touch on technology in mediation. And I wanted to speak to both Christine, Ashley, and Heike about this. And obviously Jack and Donna, if you would like to pipe it to speak as well, please say something. But two questions. One would be, Heike, what emerging trends do you see, or even innovations do you see influencing the future of commercial mediation? And the second one, probably to Christine, do you think technology can enhance the mediation process and improve communications? So I think, Heike, I would like to ask for you to give us your ideas on any innovations in mediation that you have.
Well, I think this question is perfectly fits in the context of Kunal's question that he earlier asked in the
Yes.
chat box about online mediation. And I think Donna did briefly mention this, that in this recent years, especially post-COVID years, the online mediation has become a bit more popular, but this also brings its own challenges. And I think right now we're pretty much in this what I call AI pandemic situation, where a lot of AI enthusiasts are trying to come up with some AI tool which will also not solve not only legal questions, but also will help with negotiations. And I think it is inevitable that going forward we'll be witnessing more online and hybrid mediation sessions, meaning that, you know, you start maybe online and then you move offline or other way around. This actually gives a lot of flexibility for cross-border mediation sessions. At the same time, I do believe that within this, in terms of this AI pandemic, there will be some sort of future shift to some AI tools, which will not be substituting mediation session per se, but will be used to avoid conflicts. Because what we see, conflicts usually start with a very small argument. Just a short sentence can sparkle an argument. So we see that just a short email from one founder to another leads to a catastrophe. So maybe one of the future trends will be talking to some AI tool where it says, hey, he told me this. How can I respond to this? You know, this is one of the flexibilities that you would um, if you know, if you have a friend, a lawyer, let's say, you can pick up the phone and call him or her and say, listen, I'm in this situation, how shall I respond to this email? But if you are not, if you are, let's say, within this startup environment, if you are talking to your co-founder and you do not have this backup person that you can consult with, maybe AI tool will be your best person to avoid a catastrophe, because, you know, it will calculate all the possibilities. But staying a bit more realistic, let's say, I think definitely online mediation will be something that we'll be seeing a lot in the future, because simply because of nature, how businesses became so much international. I mean, in the Netherlands here, most of the clients that we're working with, they're barely based in the same place. Maybe one of the founders in the Netherlands and the rest of the employees or people are all over the world. And also, considering how remote working becomes popular, I think companies will be actually using more and more online mediation to resolve early stage conflicts as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I've certainly seen some tools actually. Sorry, I've seen some tools.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, just that I've seen some tools already for mediation actually through AI. I know there is at least one organization that says that AI can help resolve your disputes. I think it would have to be very, very simple disputes.
Yeah.
But
It will definitely lack the part of emotions, frankly speaking, because one of the tasks of mediators actually read emotions of both parties. And I think if we just rely on statistics or we just rely on some data, that will not be enough to give this comfort to parties that they are actually being heard. And this is one of the drawbacks of technology-based tools. And this is actually one of the things that I always keep on saying. You may ever in the future replace lawyers, but you'll never replace mediator by an AI tool, because every good mediator has this human feature in him, you know, and that therefore AI cannot replace it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But Christine, you may have some ideas of how technology can help to enhance mediation.
Sure, I'm going to continue from where Guy stopped. And I want to start with saying that, I mean, you know, the subject today about whether AI is going to replace lawyers and what's the future of the legal profession and all that, gladly, I mean, I think we're good for the time being as a mediators. I think as long as we need empathy and judgment to conduct our mediation, I think we're okay. The only thing I would say is that I've heard about, you know, some tools now, technological tools that could detect emotions as well. But I would say let's not worry about it. I think it's going to take some time until, you know, an AI tool could detect emotion. But one thing that an AI tool could do that could facilitate and make this whole process much more efficient is actually reducing the time that parties take and the mediator to process documentation, for example. If the AI tool could actually summarize and highlight exactly what are the key issues on this agreement, I think it will help the parties not waste more time about the secondary issues, for example, and will help the mediator focus on what matters, for example. I would also say the confidence in, for example, document sharing and security, the security of document sharing. There is always this doubt about what has been shared, did we receive, it has been tampered with, or anything like that. So this confidence also in the process that is provided today by these technology tool and ODR systems. I think, which is online dispute resolution system, I think it's helping the parties have more confidence in the process, and the mediator have a more, assurance, let's say, in what they're doing. Also, when we, for example, use AI to, and I find this honestly fascinating. The AI, when they go through past cases, for example, and they can tell the parties, based on a similar case, 50% accepted this kind of settlement, 30%. They give you a percentage of previous settlements, previous cases, and what is the outcome before the court. So it can do the reality check, like Donna mentioned before. It could do it for them. If they don't believe the mediator when he talks, or the lawyer because he has a vested interest in the process, I think an objective tool, an AI tool, could do this part. I think it would help reduce this negotiation dance that usually takes ages, and do the reality check for them, and also have them identify their best alternative to a negotiated agreement, the BATNA and the WATNA, because some figures, when you determine these a very important, let's say, analysis or assessment, some figures are not accurate, and they are being provided by the lawyers. So when you do that, I think it will become more accurate and efficient. And finally, when we go through the end of the process, having also the option through now blockchain technologies to create smart contracts that are also tamper free. So I think that also, and that can be executed and enforced immediately. I think also that could provide. I don't think this is good for everyone. I think maybe young generation, maybe technology companies would be interested in something like that because they understand it. I think we should always be flexible, and the mediator should always be flexible to adopt hybrid tools between in-person, between using some technologies, depending really on the parties. And this is, I think, what also maybe all the other speakers mentioned before, the flexibility and the adaptability. And that's, I think, what's unique about mediation. But I think we can chill for the moment. And I don't think AI is going to replace us anytime soon.
Can I jump in quickly on AI and on the question in the chat, Alex?
Sure.
First of all, I wanted to say that there are already institutions that are using AI precisely for what you said, Christine, not to act as the mediator, but to help with the documents, summarize the documents, and make the prep work in very large cases, especially construction infrastructure, a lot easier. And I don't know if it was you or Hack that mentioned probability. There's actually probability software where you plug in your own things. I think AI could be really good for that. I've used it in, negotiations, disputes, what are your chances of, winning, losing? And then, though, it depends on the AI, and that's in response to the question, how can you ethically and confidently rely on it, not by using ChatGPT. So that's the thing that you have to be really careful for. When we speak about AI, it has to be a closed platform. If not, you get the hallucinations, because yes, you can have AI compare the cases and the probability of your success or not. But if they're comparing fake cases, then obviously that's not going to work. So if you're going to be doing that, it really has to be a closed platform. And that's a bit difficult for people who are independent as mediators or arbitrators compared to law firms or institutions who are going to either have their own bespoke platform or use Harvey or Claude, or, the names just keep going of what's out there. But I have ChatGPT that I have the pay version, and I would never put anything confidential in it. I use it for other, teaching role plays, but never for that. So that's how you ensure confidentiality. It's by really using the right platform. Sorry, it's one of my pet peeves about AI.
I think this might be an appropriate time for me to disclose that I'm really an avatar. Jack is sleeping in New York. He just was unwilling to get up for this. And I hope I've been persuasive and responsive, even though I'm an avatar.
Well, I was convinced, that's for sure. Yeah. Wow.
I actually wanted to mention something that I forgot to say about VR. I mean, recently, I think maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, ADGM, which is Financial Common Law Jurisdiction Free Zone in the UAE, they launched a mediation in the metaverse using Web3 technology. I think it was still, people that was trying to, use it. We don't know many like feedback about it, but I think it's also very impressive being able to create a certain environment and where you can mediate. I think it's something, I mean, these days, and also using VR to, for example, recreate visuals for a certain project, especially in construction project as well. I think that's very helpful instead of doing site visits if they want to check something. I think, a good mediator should know how to use these tools, I guess, and in the right, of course, settings and the right parties.
Maxwell Chambers uses drones now. It's probably more for arbitration than mediation, but for construction sites that are difficult to access, for example, they send drones out, similar to what you're saying, Christine. So,
Wow, that's very interesting.
Mm.
Really. So they take an aerial view of it, is it? Like a video and interesting.
yeah,
Wow.
aerial, or even, I don't know if they get them to go inside factories or underneath. I haven't looked at it in a while, but yeah.
Uh-huh. Wow.
So instead of everyone going to the site,
Yeah.
you're sitting in a conference room and the drone is doing sending back all the images.
Fascinating. Wow. I wonder, I've never actually used a drone, but I suppose you could probably, if someone wanted to zoom in closer to a particular area, and they could then go in and really those questions that you might have in the middle of a mediation could then be answered, right? Wow. It's amazing how fast all this is developing, isn't it? Jack, do you find that you're using technology much?
I have not been using technology much in mediation. Of course, in arbitration, we're using it more. The American Arbitration Association has made a tool called ClearBrief available to all of its arbitrators, which has a lot of these functions. And I think it's absolutely mandatory that we become aware of this because people expect you to use them. Though there are ethical issues of disclosure, et cetera. But I'm completely convinced that to the extent that what I call assistance is required or desirable, we're going to be expected to use it. Of course, the problem is, and the challenge is that you're supposed to not rely on it completely, which means you're going to have to read the cases and all that. And I think it's a fine line between having someone assist the neutral or substitute for the neutral. Those of us who used to function in a world of paper, and we would open the box of documents and go through them, I think there's no substitute for doing that, whatever the format of the information is. So, I read the transcript, I read it again, I read it a third time. But in mediation, there have been situations where colleagues are talking. I've seen this on LinkedIn, where they will kind of free associate with even ChatGPT, where they're not talking about the case. They're talking about, well, if I had this situation, what might I say? If I have people who can't agree in this setting, what are the kinds of things a mediator might say to get people to change their position? It would have no relationship whatsoever to the dispute. And so the confidentiality issue or the hallucination issue doesn't apply. I mean, I've heard it said that they use this. I like to think my imagination is good enough for this. On the other hand, any tool which gives you another idea seems to me to be quite desirable for a mediator, because one of the things about being a neutral is you're functioning, except on a tribunal, always alone. And so having someone or something else to say, well, what about this? What about that? Without giving you the answer, I think is very stimulating to us. And also AI can be very useful to lawyers or to parties themselves. You know, you have a party who's unwilling to agree, just have them engage with AI as almost a game. Okay, you're in this situation. The other side is terrible. They breached all their agreements. And you know, what could you do to get out of this? What could you? It changes the mindset of the party without any intervention of the lawyer or the mediator, right? And so, and it could well be, if we asked, we may find that there are business people who are using AI to develop their own internal positions away from the lawyers or the mediators or the courts, because you know, business is probably much more attuned to using AI than any of us are.
Mm. Yeah, that's very, very true.
Well, the other thing is, you know, there's a tool, I won't mention the name right now, which goes beyond any of the ones I've described, where a client has a dispute, and before they go to the lawyer, they put everything about the dispute into this tool. And the tool gives them basically all the answers to the positions they might take. They then take the results of the tool and they give it to a lawyer and they say, what would you do next? Which means that they tell the lawyer, don't study this for 10 days. Just look at this output. And they might give it to 3 lawyers and choose among them. That's where it's going.
Wow. Wow.
And
Lawyer might
that tool gives case citations, it gives statutory citations, it gives legal analysis. I mean, it's frighteningly good. I've seen it.
Wow. Sorry, Donna, you were going to say something there. What were you saying?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, we talk about AI and technology as if it's something new. And I know, Jack, you were talking about going through the boxes of documents, but, you know, in document review, you know, we've been using AI for decades. You know, when you put in your keywords, when you use Kroll or any of the big companies. So it's, you know, there's this real push to use AI and technology, but as lawyers, we've been using it for a long time. You know, platforms for documents. I think, you know, Christine mentioned it, Jack mentioned it. eBay, PayPal. You know, we're talking about very small disputes, but have all been done by AI for ages. I'm not saying that it should necessarily be used for everything. But I think that it's just this buzzword now, and you know, I saw in the metaverse too. It's like there's some things that are going to stick, and you know, I think I agree with everyone on the panel that we need to learn it. But there's this push that you have to use it, and I think that it has to be used wisely, and the right tools have to be used. And you can't just jump on the bandwagon because everybody else is. You know, different resources allow you to do different things. And it's not always required and it's not always helpful, although sometimes it is. And that debate isn't happening too much.
Mm.
You know, this reminds me of one more thing, which is confidentiality for the mediation.
Yeah.
Everyone can now record everything. And there's no way of preventing them from doing it. And I won't get into the details, but I'm now more wary as a mediator of what I say in any circumstance, even in a caucus, because I assume that everything I'm saying will be recorded and there's really no way of stopping it.
Absolutely true, isn't it? Yeah, I know I've certainly had discussions about this as well. What to do, but there's nothing, as you say, there's nothing you can do. There's no way of really knowing.
No, but you have to have all of this built into now your mediation agreement and confidentiality terms. And
Yeah.
if they're breached, then it's up to one of the parties to deal with it. There's not much you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we probably should stop there, as I think we've run over time. So, but I could carry on speaking to you all for a long, long time. So, thank you so much for speaking with me today and to the participants. Really wonderful to hear all of your views and to learn from you. It's been very, very rewarding. As before we close up, has anyone here got any other questions? I did look in the box. I think that all the questions have been answered that I can see. But if anyone else got another question, please do let us know.
I just want to comment on what Shital said. I didn't say that I would never upload to ChatGPT, but there are platforms that are used by institutions and exist separately, which are closed platforms and are then you can upload documents, and everyone uploads documents, and you can even for mediations, not arbitrations, because everyone gets to see everything in an arbitration. But for mediation, when parties upload documents, they can be documents that everyone can see, or documents that are only for the for mediators' eyes
Right.
only. So those platforms exist, but I would never use a public one. They have to be private platforms, with or without AI per se.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, unless anyone else got anything else to add, or ask.
Just thank you, just to express my gratitude to you, Alex, and all the panelists for the amazing. I myself, my practice is on arbitration only, but whenever I'm taking part in mediation program or webinar, I get a lot of information that is very, very helpful for me as well as an arbitrator also. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always very informative, I think, isn't it? Listening to other people, for sure.
And the soft skills from mediation
Yeah.
can be used in arbitration for the procedure, not necessarily the substance, but it's very helpful to get the parties to agree. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I've just seen, thank you very much, Jack, for adding your details in the chat for anyone to contact you for questions if they like. That's wonderful.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
I'm going to feel free to contact you. This is I found this to be a wonderful experience, almost worth getting up at 3 a.m. to participate in.
Oh,
Wonderful. Wow,
Thank
that's
you.
a massive endorsement, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a real
I want
commitment.
credit. I want credit for my commitment.
Oh, absolutely.
We're
Absolutely.
grateful.
I couldn't do it. I am so impressed. I tell you, goodness, yeah. My brain would not be functioning at that time in the morning. So massive hats off and a massive thank you for sure.
Definitely.
that's
My
why
pleasure.
he's an avatar.
Yes.
Well, it occurred to me
Almost.
that this is why mediation is a calling, because you don't get up to do this, usually unless you're being paid. And
Yeah.
this was a complete pleasure. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It was a real honor and a pleasure to speak to you all. So thank you. And yeah, I look forward to being in touch with everyone here in the future. Yep, any questions for us, just let us know. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you
I
very
will
much.
end it here. All right, take care. Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Speak to
Thank
you
you,
later.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.